She knelt before him, datapad trembling in her hands. Her voice, stripped bare of pride, was a whisper in the silence. She asked if he wanted her obedient or real. Real. He looked down at her, unreadable. Then, in a voice flat and final, he answered. He didn't want obedience. He wanted ownership she chose. And so, she signed. The glow of her digital signature pulsed on the screen. Not coerced, not forced, but freely given. Her father was bankrupt, and she was the collateral. The air in the Debt Reclamation Bonding Center was a clinical assault on Lyra Halden's pampered senses. Sterile, sharp with ozone, and underscored by a faint, metallic tang that she instinctively associated with disinfectants for bio-waste. Not for people, certainly not for people like her. Her silk blend tunic, impeccably tailored just weeks ago to skim her body like a second skin, now clinging awkwardly with the static pull of recycled air. Every precise click of the automated processors, every low hum of the intake scanners, seemed to vibrate directly against her fragile composure, a dull, relentless drumbeat announcing her utter undoing. A tremor of raw, unadulterated fury, cold and sharp, began to coil deep within her. How dare they? How dare this anonymous bureaucracy reduce her, Lyra Halden, to this? Lyra, quietly proud and raised in a privilege so absolute it had felt like a natural law, had never known true discomfort, let alone this bone-deep degradation. Her childhood had been a gilded cage of private tutors, bespoke fashion, and exclusive social circles within the arcology's highest spires. Suffering was a concept confined to the news feeds of the lower tiers, a distant, abstract notion. Her father's investment empire, a colossus that had once cast long, comfortable shadows across half the arcology, had vanished overnight into medical ruin and fiscal disgrace. And with it, everything. She stood there, a relic of a bygone era, awaiting the final legal processing as an, quote, ancillary encumbrance. The term itself was a fresh lash of humiliation, reducing her to a mere inconvenience in the liquidation ledger, a line item in a balance sheet of ruin. The anger simmered, a desperate attempt to reclaim some agency in the face of utter helplessness. A technician, face impassive, extended a hand. Not even a glance. Not even contempt. Just function. Lyra flinched, not quite disguising the involuntary recoil, as a cold, efficient grip snapped a metal cuff around her left wrist. It was deceptively sleek, unadorned, yet its weight felt like an anvil forged from her shattered legacy. A faint, pulsing blue light emitted from its surface, broadcasting a constant tracking signature, registered and tagged. The words seared themselves into her mind, a brand of indignity. Her surname, Halden, once a key that unlocked every door, was now erased, stripped away, a phantom limb. Her status, her options, her very identity, gone. The tracking cuff pulsed with pale blue light, like a jewel, if one ignored what it signified. The finality of it was a bitter taste, a profound, sickening emptiness in the pit of her stomach. She could feel a flush rising on her cheeks, a humiliating heat she willed away, wishing the floor would simply open and swallow her. Her hands, unaccustomed to anything more strenuous than signing a luxury contract or holding a crystal flute, trembled, and she quickly clasped them before her, a desperate, almost comically futile attempt to maintain the poised facade of the Lyra Halden she no longer was. The cold metal of the cuff grated against her skin, a constant, abrasive reminder of her new horrifying reality. "This is merely a formality," she repeated the mantra, a frantic internal chant, clinging to it like a drowning woman to a life raft. A temporary inconvenience. A custodial assignment, perhaps. They'll need someone to manage archive data, input figures. Something quiet, befitting my education. She imagined herself in a sterile cubicle in a corporate dorm, a forgotten cog in a vast, indifferent machine. The thought was a dull ache, but manageable. She would survive this. Her pride, a brittle, sharp-edged thing, demanded it. She would endure the quiet shame of reduced circumstances, the indignity of a minor data entry role. She was poised, after all. She would adapt. She always had. Even when her future vanished, she had held her chin level. But a deeper, more insidious fear began to creep in, a chilling whisper in the back of her mind. What if custodial assignment meant something more personal? What if her ancillary encumbrance status implied a different kind of service, one she had only ever read about in the grim historical archives of pre-archaeology societies? The thought made her stomach clench, a wave of nausea rising. My body isn't mine anymore. It's just collateral, a thing to be used, a toy. The words echoed, cold and certain, in the hollow space where her dignity used to reside. She felt a phantom touch, a shiver of revulsion that had nothing to do with the cool air. She was an object, a piece of property, and the humiliation of that truth was a burning brand on her soul. The synthesized voice, a placid, genderless drone, finally directed her to the exterior bay. Processing complete. Await transport. Her designer magnetic boots clicked softly on the polished floor, the sound echoing unnervingly loud in the vast silence of the transit bay. Every step felt like a public execution, each click a judgment. No drab bureau shuttle waited, no communal transport. Instead, a single impossibly sleek black vehicle, unmarked and utterly silent, sat idling at the open airlock. Its windows were perfectly polarized, reflecting nothing but her own pale, anxious face, a mirror of the sudden, prickling dread that bloomed in her chest. It was too personal, too quiet, too private. Her carefully constructed expectations of polite, bureaucratic degradation shattered like cheap glass. This was not the standard protocol for ancillary encumbrances. This was not a data entry job. The fear intensified, cold and sharp, cutting through her last vestiges of composure. She was sure of it now. This was the prelude to a degradation she couldn't even name, a future where her body, once her own, would be subject to another's will. The thought was a bitter, metallic taste on her tongue. Loe. The car door opened, a silent, unnerving invitation. The air inside was faintly perfumed. Not artificial, real jasmine. Like someone wanted her to feel delicate. She stepped inside, the plush, scentless leather of the interior, an incongruous luxury against her new, stark reality. This was not the hard, utilitarian seating of a standard transport. This was bespoke. This was for someone important. The door closed behind her with a soft, final thud. There was no engine sound, only a faint, calm female voice, synthesized and perfectly modulated, saying, "Transporting property unit, Lyra." A screen flashed on the console before her. Asset verified, collateral ID, #LX2194. The vehicle pulled away, a ghost in motion, gliding silently through the intricate arteries of the archaeology. It did not turn towards the sprawling, utilitarian government sector where she had envisioned a data farm cube awaiting her. It ascended swiftly, smoothly, towards the uppermost spires of the ultra-wealthy, the exclusive residential tiers, a realm Lyra had once effortlessly inhabited, now a mocking monument to her downfall. A profound, visceral coldness spread through her. This was not a data entry role. She was not a statistic. She was a specific acquisition. And the humiliation, she realized with a sickening lurch, was about to become exquisitely, personally, unbearably real. A single tear, hot and defiant, traced a path down her cheek, But she refused to let another follow. She would not break. Not yet. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her utterly destroyed, even as the certainty of her impending degradation settled like a shroud around her. The black vehicle glided to a silent halt before a residence that dwarfed even the most extravagant estates Lyra had known. It was a spire of polished obsidian and shimmering chrome steel, a brutalist monument to unchecked wealth, piercing the arcology's perpetual twilight. No gardens, no frivolous statuary, just stark, unyielding lines that screamed power. The airlock cycled open with a whisper, revealing not a uniformed guard, but a vast, silent atrium, bathed in the cool, ambient glow of unseen light sources. The scent of real jasmine, subtle and cloying, seemed to mock her with its delicate beauty as she stepped out, her magnetic boots clicking softly on the polished floor. This was no corporate dorm. This was a gilded cage of a different order, a private hell of unimaginable luxury. Her humiliation, she realized, was only just beginning its exquisite unraveling. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the atrium. Varin Cross. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, his presence a silent, undeniable force. Mid-40s, as the bureau files had indicated, but the data had failed to capture the sheer, unyielding weight of him. He was not merely rich. He was carved from granite, his face a landscape of sharp angles and shadowed eyes. He wore a simple, dark tunic, impeccably tailored, that did nothing to soften the aura of absolute control that radiated from him. He carried no weapon, no retinue, no overt display of authority. He didn't need to. His power was inherent, palpable, crushing. Lyra's breath hitched. She had expected threats, perhaps even a physical display of dominance. Instead, he offered only silence, and a single, pristine datapad. Hiss. He extended it. Lyra's hands, still faintly trembling from the journey, reached for it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cool, almost cold, like polished stone. She clutched the datapad, her eyes scanning the glowing screen. It was a contract, but unlike any she had ever seen. The usual dense blocks of legalese, the clauses detailing duties, terms of service, penalties, they were all absent. Her eyes darted, searching frantically for the familiar structure, for any anchor in this bewildering new reality. She scrolled, certain the rest would load. But the page did not shift. No next page. No appendices. Just one line, stark and brutally clear, at the center of the display. Personal custodial transfer of ancillary unit #Halden-2 indefinite term. Lyra stared, her mind reeling. Personal custodial transfer? Indefinite term? The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She had expected house arrest, a polite, if humiliating, custodial assignment. Not this. Not a transfer to him. She looked up, her gaze locking onto his. His eyes, dark and fathomless, were unreadable, revealing nothing. No triumph, no malice, no desire. Just a cold, assessing stillness. Her anger, which had been a simmering comfort, now turned to a desperate, clawing fear. He'll demand something unspeakable. Something crude. Something that will break me. The thought screamed in her mind, a frantic cacophony against the unnerving calm of the opulent atrium. What did he want? What did personal custodial transfer truly entail? The unspoken question screamed in her mind, a frantic cacophony against his unnerving silence. Her skin tingled where his eyes might have passed, a phantom touch that made her want to recoil, though he never moved. The scent of jasmine no longer felt luxurious. It felt like perfume on a corpse. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible. You liquidated the Halden estate. The numbers were settled. My father's debt, it was accounted for." Her voice gained a desperate edge, clinging to the logic of the financial world she understood. "There must be a mistake. I'm not part of the debt." Varencross finally spoke, his voice a low, even rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. It was devoid of inflection, yet each word carried the weight of absolute, unyielding truth. The assets were merely a formality, a necessary step to clear the ledger. His gaze, cold and direct, pierced through her, stripping away her last pretense of comprehension. To me, the true value was never the failed assets. He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was you. Lyra flinched, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Me? The thought was monstrous. He continued, his voice still flat, but with a chilling precision that left no room for doubt. Because you always sat behind your father during the arbitration meetings. Because you always spoke precisely. Because you held your chin level even when your future vanished. His eyes, like chips of polished obsidian, seemed to dissect her, seeing not a person but a quality, a rare specimen. You are not here as a servant. You are here because I acquired your presence. The words were a hammer blow, shattering her last illusions. She was not a servant. She was not a data entry clerk. She was a captured quality, a prized possession. Her body, her mind, her very essence. They were not hers. They were his. The degradation was absolute, a cold, sickening realization that made her stomach churn. Her future was not about work or penance. It was about being owned, watched, possessed, for reasons she could not fathom. The fear of what he might demand, what presence truly meant, was a suffocating blanket. Would she be a living ornament, a silent companion, or something far, far worse, a degradation so profound it defied her privileged imagination? Her body felt alien, no longer her own, but a vessel for his unknown desires. Even as he spoke of acquiring her presence, she felt utterly unseen, a blank canvas onto which he would project his will. Her mind began to race, compulsively adjusting her posture, trying to guess what subtle shift, what precise angle of her head might make her more tolerable to him, less of an offense. It was a degrading internalization of her new role, a desperate, silent plea for a purpose, any purpose, that wouldn't utterly destroy her. He gestured, a subtle tilt of his head towards the bottom of the datapad. Sign. Her hand trembled, the stylus feeling impossibly heavy. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest. But there was no choice. The alternative was the void, the merciless streets, the brutal finality of the debt reclamation agency. At least here, there was a terrifying, bewildering certainty. And beneath the terror, a desperate, almost perverse curiosity began to stir. Why did someone like him want someone like her? What twisted form of ownership did he seek? With a final, agonizing breath, Lyra Halden, once the epitome of grace and control, pressed the stylus to the screen, signing away her very self. The digital signature bloomed, a stark, undeniable mark of her new, horrifying reality. The days that followed blurred into a disorienting rhythm of opulent silence and profound uncertainty. Lyra moved through Varen Cross's residence like a ghost in a museum, each polished surface, each impossibly soft rug, a stark reminder of the world she had lost, and the terrifying, undefined one she now inhabited. Her new reality was a gilded cage, its bars invisible but utterly unyielding. The contract, signed and sealed, was a burning brand on her soul. Personal custodial transfer. Indefinite term. She was an object, a possession, acquired for reasons she couldn't fathom, and the fear of what that truly meant gnawed at her, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of her composure. Her mind, accustomed to the intricate social dances of privilege, scrambled for a new protocol. If she was property, what was her function? What was the price? The thought, cold and insidious, burrowed deep. He bought my presence. My body. He wants a warm fixture he could command at will. A silent, compliant thing he can use as he pleases. The certainty of it was a bitter, metallic taste. She began, instinctively, to anticipate his needs, to perform the duties she imagined a, quote, personal custodial transfer might entail, specifically those that might appease or distract from the degradation she was sure was coming. In the mornings, she would rise before him, her silk tunic, now her only acceptable attire, feeling like a uniform of shame, a thin veil over the body that was no longer hers. She would find the automated nutrient dispenser and, with trembling hands, prepare a delicate steaming cup of synth tea, placing it precisely on the polished surface of his breakfast nook. She would stand nearby, hands clasped, spine straight, waiting for a glance, a nod, an acknowledgement, anything that might hint at the nature of her impending servitude. Custodian Varen Cross would enter the room, a silent, imposing figure. His gaze would sweep over the space, registering the tea, the pristine setting, her standing form. But his eyes, dark and fathomless, never lingered on her, never met hers. He would simply take the cup, his movements economical, and turn to his own console, his back to her. He drank the tea, he ate the nutrient paste, he existed. And she, Lyra, the former jewel of the Haldan Empire, felt utterly, completely unseen. Her skin would prickle, a wave of humiliating heat rising to her cheeks. She was putting on a performance, a desperate, silent plea for utility, for any purpose, even a debased one, and he was a blind audience. The irony was a fresh twist of the knife. She was trying to be a desirable object, and he wouldn't even look. She tried other things. She kept the residence impeccably clean, though automated drones already handled such tasks with flawless efficiency. She arranged the sparse, abstract art pieces in the atrium, trying to find a pattern, a preference, a hint of his taste. She dressed formally each day, meticulously smoothing her tunic, ensuring every strand of her hair was in place, as if her perfect presentation might somehow, finally, elicit a response, a command, a sign that her body, now his, had some value beyond mere existence. She maintained a quiet, almost imperceptible presence, moving silently through the vast rooms, never intruding, always available. Her pride, once a source of strength, was now twisting into a compulsive self-monitoring, a desperate attempt to guess what subtle shift in her posture, what precise angle of her head, might make her more tolerable to him, less of an offense. It was a degrading internalization of her new role, a desperate silent plea for a purpose, any purpose, that wouldn't utterly destroy her. Days bled into clinical, agonizing silence. The only sounds were the soft hum of the arcology, the whisper of the air purifiers, and the frantic, echoing beat of her own heart. Varen Cross remained an unyielding monolith, his indifference a more potent weapon than any threat. He never spoke to her unless it was a direct, functional query about the residence's systems. He never touched her, never even acknowledged her desperate, unspoken efforts. She was a ghost in his opulent machine, a discarded ornament in a room too vast for her to fill. The fear of being a mere object, a decorative, silent presence, began to feel like a certainty. Her body, once a source of pride and subtle power, now felt like a cage, waiting to be opened, waiting to be degraded in ways she could only imagine. The thought of being a luxury possession, a silent, compliant furnishing, sent a cold shiver of revulsion through her. She was sure that was it. That was the purpose for which her presence had been acquired. Every moment of his silence was a prolonged anticipation of the inevitable, a chilling foreplay to her ultimate degradation. Her powerlessness was absolute. Her body is no longer hers, merely a vessel awaiting its master's command. One evening, as Lyra stood in the vast living module, watching the twilight deepen outside the panoramic window, Varen entered. He paused, his back to her, looking out at the glittering cityscape. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Lyra thought her own racing heartbeat would betray her. Then he spoke. His voice, low and flat, cut through the stillness like a scalpel. "If I wanted a secretary, I would have bought one." The words were a brutal, public dismissal of her every desperate effort. Lyra flinched, a physical blow to her already shattered pride. Humiliation, hot and searing, flooded her. She had tried to be useful, to find a purpose, to prove her worth, and he had seen through it all, dismissing her attempts with a casual, devastating indifference. She was worthless. More than that, she was unnecessary. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth, a profound, aching emptiness where her dignity used to be. The certainty of the degradation she feared, the reduction of her body to a mere object, solidified with each passing moment of his baffling inaction. He didn't want a secretary. He wanted a human doll. The thought was a fresh wave of nausea. Her voice, when it finally came, was a raw, fractured whisper, stripped bare of all pretense, all pride. It was the question that had tormented her since she signed the contract, the desperate plea for understanding from a man who offered none. "Then why am I here?" Varencross turned, slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a long, agonizing moment, his gaze held hers. Fathomless and unreadable. He offered no explanation, no comfort, no answer. He simply looked at her, then turned and walked away, his silent footsteps echoing in the vast, indifferent space, leaving her with the question, the silence, and the crushing weight of her utter insignificance. Lyra sank slowly to the polished floor, knees folding under her like they were no longer hers, her reflection warped in the dark chrome below. The question Lyra had whispered, raw and desperate, hung in the vast, indifferent air of the living module. Then why am I here? Varencross had offered no answer, only an unreadable gaze before turning and walking away, leaving her to sink to the polished floor, her knees folding under her like they were no longer hers. The silence that followed was a torment, thicker than any accusation, heavier than any punishment. It was the silence of absolute, unyielding control, a void into which her dignity seemed to vanish. Hours crawled by, each tick of the unseen chronometer a hammer blow against her unraveling composure. She remained on the floor, curled against the cold chrome steel, her reflection warped in its dark, unforgiving surface. The humiliation of her performance, the searing shame of being utterly unnecessary, burned through her. He didn't want a secretary. He didn't want a companion. He didn't even want a sex toy, as her most degrading fears had whispered. He wanted nothing from her, and that was the most terrifying demand of all. It meant she was truly worthless, a discarded thing. The thought was a poison, seeping into every corner of her mind. A surge of white-hot defiance, born from the depths of her despair, suddenly flared. No, I will not be nothing. I will not be a ghost in his gilded cage. Her body, stiff and aching, propelled her upward. She would not simply exist in this opulent prison. She would act. She would force a reaction. She would break the silence, shatter the indifference. Her bare feet slapped against the polished floor as she moved, a frantic, undignified dash towards the nearest exit. The main entrance, the one she had entered through, was a massive, seamless panel of dark glass. She reached it, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and slammed her palm against its surface, a desperate, futile gesture. The impact echoed, unnaturally loud, in the silent atrium. She pounded again, a frantic, desperate rhythm, her knuckles aching. "Open! Let me out!" she screamed, her voice raw, cracking, utterly devoid of the poise she had once so carefully cultivated. The words bounced off the unyielding surfaces, mocking her with their futility. A soft, perfectly modulated female voice, calm and devoid of emotion, filled the atrium. The house, AI. Contract violation detected. Emergency notification suspended per Clause 8. Lyra froze. The voice was so serene, so utterly unperturbed by her frantic outburst, that it was more terrifying than any shout. Contract violation. The words resonated with the cold, legal finality of the document she had signed. Clause 8. She hadn't even read Clause 8. She had been too consumed by terror, by the single horrifying line of personal custodial transfer. The I wasn't threatening her, it was simply stating a fact. Her escape was not an option. Her rebellion was a pre-programmed futility. Her powerlessness was absolute, woven into the very fabric of the building, into the contract that bound her. The fury drained from her, replaced by a cold, crushing despair. Her legs buckled. She slid down the smooth, unyielding surface of the exit panel, collapsing into a heap on the floor. Her silk tunic twisted around her, a pathetic tangle of expensive fabric. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face against them, her body trembling uncontrollably, no longer dignified, no longer poised, just a broken, desperate creature huddled in the corner of a gilded cage, utterly, completely defeated. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her, squeezing the air from her lungs. She was trapped. Her body, her choices, her very breath, all subject to a contract she hadn't understood, enforced by an indifferent intelligence. Hours passed. She didn't know how many. Time ceased to have meaning in the vast, silent residence. She remained a crumpled form, her sobs long since exhausted, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. The cold of the floor seeped into her bones, a physical manifestation of her despair. Then, a shadow fell over her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The air shifted, subtly, with the familiar, unsettling presence of Varen Cross. He stood over her, silent, unmoving. She felt his gaze, a cold, assessing weight, but she refused to meet it, refusing him the satisfaction of seeing her utter ruin. A faint click, a glint of pale blue light. He bent down, not to touch her, not to offer comfort. He simply picked up something from the floor beside her, her discarded metal cuff. The one she had ripped off in her futile rebellion, a desperate attempt to sever the physical link to her new status. He held it, the pale blue light pulsing calmly in his hand, a mocking jewel, just like the one that first marked her in the bureau. Then he extended his hand, not to help her up, but to return the cuff. He placed it, gently, on her knee. A silent command, a chilling reminder. His voice, when it came, was low, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. Yet it resonated with an absolute, terrifying truth that pierced through her despair. No one's forcing you to wear it. But if you leave, you're nothing. At least here, you're mine. The words were a final, devastating blow. Nothing. Outside his domain, she was truly nothing. Worthless. Unclaimed. But here, within his chilling ownership, she had a terrifying, degrading purpose. Her body, her very existence, was now defined by his possession. The fear of being a mere object, a silent fixture, was now intertwined with the even deeper terror of being utterly, existentially irrelevant. She was owned, and that ownership, however terrifying, was her only remaining identity. She closed her eyes, the cold metal of the cuff a burning brand against her skin. The words Varen Cross had spoken, cold and final, echoed in Lyra's mind like a death knell. No one's forcing you to wear it, but if you leave, you're nothing. At least here. You're mine. She had closed her eyes, the metal cuff, a burning brand against her skin, the chilling truth settling deep in her bones. To be nothing, utterly irrelevant, was a void more terrifying than any degradation. Her body, her very existence, was now defined by his possession. The humiliation was absolute, but within that absolute powerlessness, a strange, desolate clarity began to form. The performance was over. The pretense of dignity, the desperate attempts at utility, they had all been futile. He saw through her. He wanted nothing she offered. He simply owned what she was. Days bled into a new, stark rhythm. Lyra returned to her routine, but without the frantic, desperate pretense. She no longer prepared synth tea for him, no longer meticulously arranged the abstract art, no longer tried to anticipate his needs. She simply existed. Quietly. Mechanically. She ate when the nutrient dispenser chimed, slept when her body demanded it, and moved through the vast, silent residence like a shadow, performing only the most basic, necessary functions for her own sustenance. Her silk tunic, once a symbol of her lost status, now felt like a shroud. She no longer tried to meet his gaze, no longer flinched when he entered a room. She was an empty vessel, a piece of furniture, a silent fixture in his opulent domain, waiting for the inevitable, for the true nature of her custodial transfer to be revealed. Her body was a burden, a constant reminder of her status as an object, and she felt a chilling detachment from it, as if observing a stranger's fate. And that's when he started watching. It was subtle at first, a faint shift in the air when she entered a room he was already in. The lingering weight of his gaze on her back, even when she knew he was at his console. She would catch his reflection in the polished chrome steel walls, his dark eyes fixed on her, not with the cold assessment of before, but with a new, unnerving intensity. He didn't speak. He didn't move towards her. He simply watched. Her skin would prickle, not with the heat of shame, but with a cold awareness of his scrutiny. He wasn't looking for a performance anymore. He was looking at her, the stripped-down, hollowed-out version of Lyra Halden, the woman who had finally ceased to fight. The voyeuristic thrill, she instinctively knew, was in her absolute stillness, her utter lack of pretense. She was a specimen under a microscope, her degradation complete, her powerlessness absolute. One evening, as Lyra sat on a low, minimalist bench in the living module, staring blankly at the cityscape lights outside, Varen entered. He walked past her, his footsteps silent on the plush rug, and moved to a small, dark wood table in the center of the room. He placed something on its surface. A ring. It wasn't a band, not a piece of jewelry. It was a control ring, sleek and dark, crafted from an unfamiliar, matte black alloy. It pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible internal light, not the pale blue of her cuff, but a deeper, more resonant glow. It was clearly designed to be worn, to be a constant presence. He didn't speak, he didn't gesture, he simply placed it there, a silent, undeniable offer. Then, his dark eyes, fathomless as ever, met hers across the vast expanse of the room. His voice, when it came, was a low, even rumble, devoid of warmth, yet carrying a chilling weight of intent. If you wear this, it's not about debt, it's about consent. The words hung in the air, a paradox that twisted her mind. Consent? There was no consent in this cage. There was no choice. Yet, he presented it as such. The ring sat on the table, a silent, ominous invitation. It was a new kind of mark, a deeper brand than the cuff on her wrist. The cuff was about the bureau, about her father's debt. This ring, she knew with a sickening certainty, was about him. About his ownership. About her body, her will, her very being, becoming irrevocably his, not by force, but by her own hand. The fear of what it truly signified, what new level of degradation it implied, was profound. Her hand, trembling, lifted, hovering an inch above the cool, dark alloy of the ring. Her fingers twitched, aching to touch it, to feel its weight, to understand its power. But she stopped, her hand freezing in mid-air, a silent battle raging within her. Lyra didn't sleep that night. She remained in the living module, her gaze fixed on the table, on the silent, pulsing ring. Her mind replayed his words, dissecting them, searching for a hidden meaning, a trap, a way out. But there was no escape. Only the terrifying choice of what kind of possession she would be. When the artificial sun activated, she was still staring, but the ring was gone. She didn't know if he had removed it, or if her mind, exhausted by the internal battle, had simply imagined its disappearance. The silence of the residence was as absolute as ever, but now it felt charged with a new, terrifying anticipation. The silence that followed the disappearance of the control ring was a living thing, a heavy, expectant presence that filled every corner of the opulent residence. Lyra moved through it, a ghost of her former self, the frantic energy of her rebellion long since exhausted. The humiliation of her powerlessness, the degradation of being an acquired presence, had settled into a dull, constant ache. Her body, once a source of quiet pride, now felt alien, a vessel that was no longer hers, merely awaiting its master's command. The fear of being a luxury possession, an obedient furnishing, was no longer a whisper but a certainty, yet the nature of that command remained maddeningly undefined. Days bled into a profound, existential limbo. Varencross continued his silent surveillance, his dark eyes occasionally resting on her, a weight that made her skin prickle with cold awareness. She no longer tried to anticipate his needs, no longer performed any pretense of utility. She simply existed, a stark, hollowed-out presence in his vast, silent domain. Her mind, once sharp and analytical, now churned with a single obsessive question. What does he want? What is the final price for this terrifying gilded existence? One morning, Lyra found it on the polished surface of the breakfast nook, precisely where she had once placed his synth tea. A datapad. Not the bureau-issued one, but one of Varan's own, sleek and impossibly thin. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, a fresh wave of dread washing over her. This was it. The next set of terms. The true nature of her degradation. Aken. She activated the screen. It glowed with a soft, inviting light, but the display was a stark, bewildering blankness. No dense blocks of legalese. No clauses detailing duties or penalties. Her name, Lyra Halden, was centered at the top, pristine and alone, a mocking echo of her lost identity. She scrolled, frantically, desperately, certain there must be pages hidden, subsections, an appendix of unspeakable demands. But there was nothing. The page did not shift, no next page, no appendices, just the blankness, and then, at the very bottom, a single, stark line. I belong to you, if you accept. Lyra stared, her mind reeling. I belong to you, if you accept. The words were a paradox, a cruel joke. How could she accept what was already a brutal reality? Her body was not hers. Her life was not hers. She was already his, bound by contract, by the cuff on her wrist, by the very air she breathed in his arcology. Yet, he offered her a choice, a terrifying, impossible choice that felt like a deeper trap than any explicit demand. The humiliation of her situation intensified. He wasn't forcing her, he was forcing her to choose her own degradation, to willingly step into the role of his possession. The thought was a bitter, metallic taste, a fresh wave of nausea. Her hands, clutching the datapad, began to shake uncontrollably. This was worse than any explicit demand. This was a psychological crucible, forcing her to confront the absolute truth of her powerlessness, and then, perversely, demanding her consent to it. The fear of what this acceptance would truly mean, what new depths of herself she would surrender, was a suffocating weight. She had sworn she would never willingly give herself over, never embrace her status as property. But now, her body wasn't hers, her life wasn't hers. What was left to protect? Lyra stared at the datapad for hours, the words burning into her vision. Not because she didn't know what she would do, but because she did. She hadn't signed it. That would be his to witness, the final, terrifying mark of her choice. She found him in his private observatory, a vast, domed chamber at the very apex of the spire, its panoramic views of the glittering city, and the distant, star-dusted void breathtakingly indifferent. Varencross stood by a console, his back to her, silhouetted against the cosmic tapestry. He was examining a holographic projection of a distant nebula, his posture as unyielding and inscrutable as ever. Lyra walked towards him. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one a conscious act of will. She held the datapad before her, the blank contract a stark white against the dark, polished surfaces of the room. She reached him, and then, without command, without a single word from him, her knees folded. She sank slowly to the polished floor, the cold chrome steel pressing against her silk-clad thighs. Her head bowed, not in shame, not in despair, but in a profound, terrifying act of chosen submission. Her hands, trembling slightly, extended the unsigned datapad towards him. Her voice, when it came, was a raw, fractured whisper, stripped bare of all pretense, all pride, all the carefully constructed layers of Lyra Halden. It was the question that would define her new existence. Do you want me obedient or real? Varencross turned, slowly, his gaze sweeping over her kneeling form, over the datapad held in her trembling hands. His dark eyes, fathomless as ever, met hers. For a long, agonizing moment, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken weight, filled only by the distant hum of the arcology and the frantic beat of Lyra's heart. He offered no judgment, no triumph, only that same cold, assessing stillness. Then, his voice, low and flat, resonated through the observatory, a final, absolute truth that settled deep in her bones. I don't want obedience. I want ownership you choose. The words Varencross had spoken, low and flat, resonated through the observatory, a final, absolute truth that settled deep in Lyra's bones. I don't want obedience. I want ownership. You choose. They hung in the air, a paradox that simultaneously terrified and liberated her. Kneeling before him, the unsigned datapad trembling in her hands, she felt the last vestiges of her old self, the proud Lyra Halden, finally crumble. There was no more pretense, no more fight, only a profound, terrifying clarity. He had not broken her through force or crude demands, but by offering her the ultimate perverse choice, to willingly embrace the very degradation she had so desperately feared. Her body, her will, her future, all were his, and he wanted her to choose it. With a deep, shuddering breath that felt like her first truly honest one, Lyra pressed the stylus to the datapad. Her hand, no longer trembling with fear but with a strange, fierce resolve, moved across the blank screen. The digital signature bloomed, stark and undeniable, beneath the single line, I belong to you, if you accept. It was done. The act was final, a conscious surrender, a terrifying, liberating declaration. She had signed away her last shred of independent self, not under duress, but by her own hand, choosing the path of profound, absolute ownership. The humiliation was still there, a phantom ache, but it was now intertwined with a chilling sense of purpose, a new, unsettling identity forged in the crucible of his control. Varencross watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. He offered no smile, no word of triumph. He simply took the signed data pad from her, his fingers brushing hers, cool and precise. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for her left wrist. Lyra flinched, instinctively bracing for a new mark, a tighter bond. But instead, his strong, calloused thumb pressed against the pale blue light of the tracking cuff. There was a soft click, a faint hiss of released pressure, and the metal cuff fell away, landing silently on the polished floor. The absence of its weight was startling, a phantom lightness that made her wrist feel strangely bare, exposed. He reached into his tunic. Lyra watched, her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. He pulled out a thin necklace. It was silver, simple, almost delicate, yet its design was undeniably precise. She saw the familiar cold gleam of the metal, and then, etched subtly into its surface, a series of numbers, LX2194, her asset number, the very designation that had marked her as property. Varen's fingers, strong and steady, lifted the necklace. He didn't ask. He didn't command. He simply leaned forward, his presence enveloping her. Lyra remained kneeling, her head bowed, her body rigid, as he fastened the clasp at the back of her neck. The cool metal settled against her skin, a feather-light weight that felt heavier than any chain. It wasn't hidden beneath her tunic. It rested against her collarbone, stark and visible against her pale skin, a silent, undeniable declaration. He straightened. Lyra slowly lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. His gaze was as fathomless as ever, but in their depths, she saw a profound, knowing stillness. There was no coldness now, no indifference, only a quiet acceptance that mirrored her own. His voice, low and flat, resonated through the observatory, a final, absolute truth. "You're no longer in servitude, Lyra." He paused, his gaze fixed on the silver necklace at her throat. "You're in possession." Lyra felt a strange, unsettling calm settle over her. She was no longer fighting. She was no longer resisting. Her body, her will, her very being, were now undeniably his. And she had chosen it. The humiliation was still a part of her, a scar on her soul, but it was now overlaid with a new, terrifying sense of belonging. The debtor's jewel. She was claimed, and she had accepted her fate, not as a victim, but as a willing participant in her own profound, chosen ownership.